From Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this week's episode, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg is joined by Rabbi Dovid Gottlieb, Rabbi of Kehillat HaEla, Rebbe at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and Managing Director of Tzalash. Rabbi Gottlieb shares his unlikely aliya story, explains the inspiring mission of Tzalash, and describes the important differences between Jewish communities in Israel and abroad. Plus, a live update from Akiva on the community of Kiryat Shmona. All this and more, Behind the Bima.
Okay, we are here with my dear friend, Rabbi Dovid Gottlieb. It's a great privilege and honor to be with you in Israel. We've known each other for many, many years. And among the many reasons I admire you and look up to you, including your Svarim and your Torah that I've always learned, but is the leap that you took to bring your family and to live here and to give up an incredibly successful rabbinate. Shomrei Emunah, Baltimore, one of the big congregations in America, position of a lot of prestige and prominence, and to put your lot and your destiny in Israel. And when you did, and at the time, I don't know if you knew or anticipated or predicted being here through a war in which you have sons, son-in-law, in which as a leader of a community in a shul, or a leader of Tzalash, all this we're going to unpack and talk about right now. But it's absolutely extraordinary what you're doing. And on behalf of all of us, thank you. Thank you for all of your leadership and all that you do. And we look on with admiration, a little bit of envy, hopefully enough that one day we'll follow, one day soon. But thank you for giving us some time and letting us go behind the Bima here at the Dabru Studios in Modi'in.
Thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you referring to me as a longtime friend and not an old friend.
Exactly. Big difference between the two. Big difference. So there's so much to talk about, catch up on. But let's not begin right now. Let's take that step back and let's talk about, you have this career, you're thriving, you're a leader in the rabbinate, you're in America. What was the trigger? What pushed you, your family, to make that leap, to come on aliya, to leave the rabbinate and to come to Israel?
So it's obviously a great question, a fair question, but it's more complicated than perhaps one would think, because unlike a lot of people, both in the rabbinate and outside of the rabbinate, who have long desired, dreamed of, planned on going on aliyah, I never really did. Maybe when I first got back from yeshiva, but certainly as my...
This was one of those, well, we're dating, we're going to end up in Israel. Do you agree?
Did not come up at all.
Right.
And honestly, I really felt that I was going to be like you, a pulpit rabbi in America. I thought that I had, whatever the right skill set is for that. That was going to be my mission. That's how I was going to serve the Jewish people. And I was fine with that. And there was never any moment where there was an epiphany and I started planning on doing something else. And yet, at the same time, clearly, over time, almost subconsciously, things had started to, bubble up. But even then, it was never really a decision to go as much as I was at the end of a contract and I asked for a sabbatical. And I told the congregation at the time of the board, who was kind enough to grant the sabbatical, that in all sincerity, I needed a break and I was open to considering aliyah. I was transparent with them above board. But at the same time, I said, honestly, it's very unlikely.
Right.
Because what am I going to do in Israel?
Right.
Pulpit rabbi is not a career, and it's certainly not a parnasa in the land of Israel. So I was open to it when we went on sabbatical, but I really wasn't planning on it. So how did we get to there, and how did we finally make the decision? So I think in hindsight, and I did not know any of this really as I was going through it, as funny as that might sound, but in hindsight, it really was a number of factors. One factor, which I think a lot of people who make aliyah are somewhere in this story, is that I had a relative. In my case, it was my wife's sister, my sister-in-law, Serena and Daniel Hartstein. Mm-hmm. As sisters, they're very close. As family, we're very close. And they had just made aliyah from Bergenfield.
Right.
That was traumatic for our family. The family was always ideologically Zionistic, religious Zionist, but we never had anyone who made aliyah. We were armchair Zionists in our family, theoretical Zionists. And then all of a sudden, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law moved. And after the initial trauma, at least for me and my wife, it was a sense of, all of a sudden, there's a possibility, and we missed them. Mm. And in fact, our sabbatical was completely anchored by them. We went to Ramat Beit Shemesh and to Ramat Shiloh when our kids went to school. All of those things were based on my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law. So having family there was a huge factor. I'll tell you another thing which was interesting. I know you've done this especially with your shul during the war. I'm just not familiar if you were doing this before the war, but shul missions to Israel. Right. So when I was in Baltimore, and Shomrei Emunah, as you mentioned, Rabbi Moshe Hauer was the rabbi of Bnei Jacob Shari Zion. And the two of us, he is a friend, but a more senior colleague. Mm-hmm. So he was definitely the leader, but I was happy to be his second. The two of us led our shuls on joint missions for a number of years, I always came back on an incredible high.
Right.
Again, there was never any conscious decision, oh, this was an inspiring trip, I should make aliyah.
Right.
Maybe I should have felt that way, but honestly, I didn't. But I really was always on a high. I would always speak about the trip, the Shabbos, after I came back. And I mention this because will be especially interesting to maybe any of the rabbis in the listening audience. When we finally decided to make aliyah, a member of my shul, a congregant, who honestly, I was never sure was really listening to my drushes any week, let alone the weeks I was coming back from Israel. But it turns out I was wrong. He was not only listening, he was one of the more perceptive people in the whole shul.
Right.
Because he's told me that he was not at all surprised by our announcement. And I said to him, really? Because I'm shocked.
Right.
My family's shocked. How could be that you're not shocked?
So the energy that you brought back from those trips.
He said to me, every speech you would give the Shabbos after those trips, you were different.
Right.
He said, I saw it then.
Wow.
Is that humbling?
So here's a question. When you got up and you're making aliyah, or the sabbatical transitioned into aliyah, how many families from Shomer Emunah joined you? Because there's a misconception out there. Every time I come to Israel, if I had $1 for every time I stopped in Israel that says,
Rabbi Goldberg, if you'll do it.
Yeah, ranging from you're the reason Mashiach's not here to it'd be so nice if you came. But by the way, if you got up and announced that the entire shul would come, let alone the whole American Jewry. So how many of my friends who have done that, and it's not an excuse, I'm not asking that as coverage, but just sort of clear the record. How many heard that and said, oh, the rabbi's going, we're in with him?
Zero. Now, since then, there have been a small handful.
Right.
And there are people who, for example, moved to the current neighborhood where I am the rabbi.
Right.
Because they knew me and liked the idea of me being the rabbi. I think that's fair to say. But I am totally...
There wasn't some groundswell and mass movement and migration. And when the rabbi announced it, the whole shul said, let's turn the lights off, let's shut down, we're into...
And honestly, while I'm not here, the interview is about you interviewing me, not me interviewing you. Obviously, I think it's something that people like you should think about. And obviously, people like you and other Rabbanim in America have important leadership positions. And how do you wrestle with that, which I know you do? That's one important question. And it could be, as you yourself implied, it could be that maybe that's the right thing for you to do.
Right.
But I think that the things that people are saying to you are not fair.
Right.
Are not fair.
No, there's no question about it. Meaning, I do struggle with it and wrestle with it almost every single day. And whatever
we've spoken about it, so I know.
Yeah, we've spoken at length about it, and I appreciate that. But it wouldn't be, if a rabbi is going to make aliyah, it shouldn't be because there's an expectation or assumption that the community is going to become...
Now, I don't know. Is it possible, which I don't think was true in the case in Baltimore, is it possible that there are X number of people in your shul who are anyway wrestling with aliyah?
Right.
And if all of a sudden Rabbi Goldberg announced he's coming, they would come. I think that is at least realistic.
Right.
I have no idea what that number is.
Right.
But if there are people, and just to flesh out what you're getting at, because I totally agree with you, people who are, for better or for worse, right or wrong, but they're settled in their life, they're entangled with all sorts of commitments and responsibilities, professional and familial, in Boca.
Right.
And all of a sudden Rabbi Goldberg announces making aliyah. They can't all of a sudden...
Right. That's unlikely. So let me ask you this, when you decided to make aliyah, which was incredible, and as I say, we still look with admiration, did you understand and appreciate then the trajectory your kids would be on that you fast forward to today in the last 8 months, and what it meant, that decision, unlike the safety, security, which who knows how safe and secure Baltimore is these days, but certainly more than Gaza and the northern border where your children have served. But did you appreciate then the trajectory that they were going to be on meant ultimately serving in an army and maybe even one day having to show up for a war?
So I think not only did I not know, or fully appreciate is a better word, the trajectory that they were on, to answer the question you didn't ask, but related, which is if I look back on what's happened in my own life, leave aside my children, my own life, my own career in the last 15 years, did I anticipate that trajectory? And the answer to both of those questions is we had no idea. And I have often observed that I think it's absolutely deliberate that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hides things from us.
Right.
Because if I had known how hard it would be, the ups and downs, the zigzag in my own career, and then, of course, the challenges of raising children, even before you get to the war, just we're immigrants, let alone army service before a war, let alone army service during a war. If I had known all of those things, I probably would still be in Baltimore.
Right.
And I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu hides certain things from us.
Right. So I want to get to where your kids are today, and your son Yaakov. I've developed a really wonderful relationship with, and he's, I'm sure all your children, but really special, really amazing.
Thank you.
But you said your career zigzagged, and you've been a Ram and a Rebbe in yeshivas and have Talmidim and a lot of success in that. Today, your career is as a Rav of a up-and-coming, your shul is being built as we speak, super exciting, incredible new neighborhood in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and Tzalash, which I really want to hear more about, because I don't know that the American Jewish community knows enough about it. They should not know war. They should, especially during the war and what's going on. So tell us about both. Tell us about the community and how that's coming, its growth, what distinguishes it, how big is it, what are the vision of the future plans for it, and then we'll come to Tzalash.
Okay, so let's take one at a time. So I, unlike a lot of people who make aliyah, especially from the rabbinate, my hope was not to abandon the rabbinate. I had a long conversation with Rav Lichtenstein before making the decision. Subsequent, I followed up with both Rabbi Willig and Rabbi Rosenzweig, my two primary Rebbeim, and there was a lot of alignment that despite whatever I had accomplished in America, it was totally legitimate to be making aliyah,
right,
if I would be able to continue to serve the Jewish people in a similar capacity in Israel. Now, Rav Lichtenstein himself, in that fateful conversation, specifically asked me how big my shul was in Baltimore.
right.
When I told him, he smiled and says, obviously, we don't have shuls of that size in Israel. But he also said, 10 in Chutz La'aretz are equal to 1 in Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
So whatever he meant by that, I'll leave to people to interpret. But I always had this dream of being a shul rabbi. I did not make aliyah just thinking, I'll go into the yeshiva seminary world. I'll become a tour guide. I'll become a computer programmer. I'm not being mazazel in any of those options for different people, but it was not my option. But the truth is, despite whatever my resume may have been, and I appreciate you kindly describing it before, it was worthless in Israel. And I went through a number of years looking for, again, I already had small part-time jobs, but I was really looking for that pulpit to fulfill not only what I thought was my destiny, but also what my Rebbeim had told me was the legitimate reason that I
appreciate you being honest. It's not easy, and I really appreciate that, because that transparency, that honesty is refreshing. Most people aren't, and all of us are living in a world where we present these carefully curated lives where everything is hunky-dory and perfect and seamless and smooth. So that honesty is really, really amazing. What was that like? I had a
lot of years of struggle. One of the things I had asked Rav Lichtenstein is, where does idealism end? Where's the line between idealism and irresponsibility? I was 35, 4 children and a mortgage. And when I made aliyah, not only did I not have a job in Israel, I didn't have a job prospect. I don't say that to impress anybody. One could easily argue that was irresponsible.
Right.
But that's the facts. But in hindsight, arrogantly, naively, I just assumed if I was going to be Nachshon, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to split the Yam Suf. And Rav Lichtenstein actually kind of predicted. He said to me, someone with your resume, who wouldn't want to hire you?
Right.
The answer was apparently a lot of people.
And when you were going through that, did you second guess the decision? Were you doubting yourself? Were you doubting the system? Were you resentful about the system that you had been part of that didn't position you to succeed here? Or what was that experience like?
I wasn't resentful, but it was painful. It was obviously painful. It would be painful for anybody to struggle at any stage of life. I think that's obvious. But I think, given the level of success and what I had achieved, it was a zag that I was not looking forward to, wasn't expecting, and I could have done without, to be frank. Right. I can look back and see all the things I learned from it, and it hardened me and made me better. But at the time, I was not excited about any of it. And I really had to look for a while. But I mentioned this only because what I ended up doing was not plan A or plan B. But when I couldn't find a job in the normal way, I kind of realized, a la Field of Dreams, I guess I have to build it. If I build my own community, then I guess I'll be the rabbi. No one else will hire me, so I guess I should just do that. So to make a very long story short, I think if I remember correctly, I think it was 7 years, and it's too painful to remember how long it took with all the delays. But the bottom line was I was able to find a partner. The two of us ended up connecting and collaborating with a kablan, an Israeli builder, and there was a new expansion, a new neighborhood being built in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and we were able to partner with that kablan so that a good percentage of the houses that were being built in the new neighborhood, we would be able to be the ones marketing. And the idea was to build a neighborhood around a central shul with me as the rabbi. So that took a number of years, as I said. We won't even get to the details of all the ups and downs of Israeli real estate, Hamev and Yovin. But the bottom line was 9 months, I guess, or so, the Elul, the September, the August before Corona, that's when we finally moved in. And that's where I first had, by the way, that insight I mentioned before, that I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu hides things. Because if without the quick back of the napkin math, I think that was at least 10 years, maybe 11 years, 10 years after I made Aliyah. If you would have told me in Baltimore in 2009, which is the summer that we came, that it won't be until then that I'll actually have a shul where I'll be the rabbi of.
Right, and still be in Baltimore.
I assume so, yeah. So it took that long, but the bottom line was, at that point, I was already a Rebbe at Gush. I already had gotten that part of my life more stable, but I still wanted to be a rabbi. And that started in that community. And the vision really is a smaller, obviously much smaller version of what you aspire to be, what I aspire to be in Baltimore, and many of our friends who, thank God, are doing wonderful things in America are doing. That is to say, to be a communal hub, to be a place not just where you grab a minyan, not just which is convenient. Of course, we are that too, but to be a shul that provides shiurim, social programming, youth programming. Again, things which are ABCs in America. Some shuls do bigger. Some people do bigger. Some people do better. But that's what a shul is in Chutz La'aretz. We're familiar with the model. It's not a given in Israel. And I unapologetically feel that certain things are better in Chutz La'aretz. Not everything is better here. And that's a better model, in my opinion. I think it's better for Israelis, but they'll have to figure that out on their own. It's definitely better for Olim.
And others have agreed with you? Community's growing? How many families are you at?
So, I mean, as you know, in America and anywhere, the growth of a community is dependent on all sorts of factors.
Right.
As you know, rabbis get way too much credit and way too much blame based on membership. And there could be all sorts of factors. Sure. But the bottom line is, so we have advantages and disadvantages in terms of where we are. But the bottom line is, yes, thank God, we are about 90 families, I think, at the moment. In terms of members of the shul. We have a membership, dues, again, very low compared to America, but we have a real shul in that sense. And we have about 90 families. And when we moved in, so the house next door to mine we're renting, that's where the shul has been, vibrant since day one. But at the same time, not a 3-minute walk from where we are is the construction site, where after all sorts of delays, again, it's Israel. And then, of course, the war has slowed things down a little bit. But yes, we are in the middle of a incredibly exciting construction process, which not that far away, Ayin Hara, will lead to the completion of the actual proper.
Are there still houses available? If somebody's listening or watching and they're excited by your energy and they say, I'm looking to have a soft landing, a place to come in Israel, that a community center like I'm used to in America, are there still options, still opportunities?
There are opportunities to move into Ramat Beit Shemesh and even in my project, but not opportunities in the sense of a house that was built that was never sold. We sold out. If the houses have, not that many, but there have already been a few that have flipped. But the truth is that there are always houses that are for sale. Just like in Yerushalayim, which many of your listeners might be familiar with, every few blocks is another neighborhood. Where's Katamon end and Rechavia begin, and the German colony versus this colony. Every few blocks in Israel we call a neighborhood. Right. It's somewhat similar to Ramat Beit Shemesh. So the official project that we built was 4 blocks, but people who live, on the 5th block and even on the 8th block are a 2-minute walk and a 3-minute walk from our shul. Yeah. And we have members. We have members who bought in our project, and we have members who didn't buy in our project. People who bought in our project don't daven in the shul. It's Ramat Beit Shemesh. There are other shuls. We're not the only shul in the area, and you don't have to have bought in my project. So even if you would want to be a member of our shul, it doesn't mean you don't
have to be right there. Plus, I know there are people who participate during the week who may not be walking distance on Shabbos, but love your shiurim and love the energy and
Baruch
love the community aspect.
Right, yes, exactly.
Of the shul, and you don't have to be. So, similarly
that's
to
the shul,
when we're talking even personally about you and maybe what you didn't necessarily anticipate in the trajectory of your kid's life, you start a community, you want to reawaken that rabbi inside you, community pulpit rabbi inside you. You knew that you'd have a community where there would be young people, children of community members serving the army. You didn't know necessarily they'd be serving in the front lines, risking their lives, people losing their lives. What has it been like as a Rav Kehillah in Israel, putting the community on your back, on your shoulders, not on your own, obviously, but bearing a huge responsibility to shepherd a Kehillah through a war, and what that means with the angst and the fear and the anxiety that you know well because you're living it with them as a parent of soldiers, but also the rabbi needing to comfort, needing to build strength, needing to teach resilience, needing to navigate anxiety, needing to navigate political differences about what should happen and when and how. What's it like leading a community in Israel through this time?
So it certainly has been stressful. Our community is relatively young and predominantly Anglo. So because of that, we actually don't have huge numbers of people in the army. As you mentioned, I have 3 children, 2 sons and a son-in-law who are called up on Simchas Torah. And there are other children in the shul, and there are a few of the adults in the shul who themselves are in Miluim, either a small handful who may have grown up in Israel. I have a neighbor, he was a classmate, a contemporary of ours in NYU, who's actually a surgeon, but since he made Aliyah, he's been part of the Miluim. Even though he's either 50 or 51 now, he is still, and since Simchas Torah, not all, he's had sometimes he's been off, but he's predominantly been serving on the front lines as a combat surgeon and doctor. Wow. So we have a few of the men in our shul who are in Miluim, and a few of the kids, in an incredibly small coincidence of the 300,000 Miluimnikim, reservists that were called up on Simchas Torah. One of the men of my shul was under the command of my son-in-law. Huh. They were literally in the same group of 30 soldiers, where my son was what's called the mem, and a member of my shul was part of that. Odds are staggering. But so on the one hand, it wasn't like other neighborhoods where half the shul, or there's 30 kids in the shul who are in the army and 20 of the men, or whatever the numbers could be, even exponentially bigger than that.
Right.
We're not that.
Right.
But at the same time, A, we did have some, and B, I would say having Anglos, one of the additional challenges, exactly as you're alluding to, is that we don't have the history and the emotional experience to have dealt with this. Israelis grow up with having stories. Oh, my father or my grandfather, he was in the Yom Kippur War, he was in the Lebanon War, he did. I'm not saying it's easy for them either. War is not easy on anybody. But they grow up with this. No one's expecting, this has been the longest war in Israel's history, 8 months and running, whatever it's been. So no one's experienced this. But people had a consciousness, was part of their family history.
And Anglos don't have that to draw from.
We don't have anything.
Right. They're writing their own script.
We had color war in camp. That's the closest thing you and I come to war growing up in America.
Right.
So that has been obviously a challenge. So to answer your question about as a shul, in terms of navigating, it was frankly much easier than Corona was. Whereas Corona, with all the stresses, not to revisit all that, we'll all get PTSD. But that had issues not only with everyone scared about the disease, but all the tensions.
Will people come back? Will we survive?
Yes, mask, no mask. How strict? Not strict. Right. All the things that every shul dealt with. So we also dealt with on our own way.
Right.
So that was really complicated.
Right.
Here we don't have that. What we had, and especially in the first months of the war, obviously there was a trauma. The whole country experienced a trauma. But what we really, and I felt this, was a tremendous coming together. Everyone was really united in a way that I can't even put into words. First of all, behind the kids and the members of the shul who were already called up. Obviously, tremendous care and concern, davening for them, packaging, delivering. But also, again, not unique to our shul. All of Israel was like this, but we were no less. Cooking and delivering packages for soldiers, whether we had members of our shul there or not. So it was really intense, scary, but I think an incredibly uplifting experience. I would say overall, it wasn't like there was no divisiveness, God forbid. We were so unified, scared. Yes, the davening was intense. So I think as a shul in that regard, that's how I would describe it. And in terms of my own personal leadership, I don't remember how long it was, but certainly for the first 2 months, 3 months, I can't remember exactly how long it was. Every speech was about the war. Not only did we had a few special Tehillim gatherings, or you and I did something together one of the first weeks of the war in Beit Shemesh. So not only were those speeches obviously about the war, but every Shabbos drasha for I can't remember how long. At some point I stopped.
Has that moved on now?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And you could get up on a Shabbos and give a drush on another topic. And
I haven't spoken about the war on a Shabbos in a while. I can say never, but it's not the go-to anymore.
You don't need to.
Right.
In Boca Raton, I do every single Shabbos since then, because we want to make sure it's part of people's mindfulness, consciousness. You can't get distracted just because we're not living it. When you're here, you almost don't need to, because you're living it.
Yeah. Again, I don't think every shul rabbi is the same in Israel, obviously, but I think there's a basic truth to what you're describing, and it parallels the fact that in some shuls, I don't know what you're doing, but I still go back to America a few times. I've been to America 3 times, I think, since the war started, 3 or 4 times. And there are certainly shuls in America who are still davening with more extra things, even than shuls in Israel are doing. And I know that I was speaking to one of my colleagues early on who wasn't doing something that I was doing, and I asked him, Rabbi Shalom Rosner, and he made exactly the point you said. I don't need to do that in my shul.
Right, we're living it.
So again, we were doing Avinu Malkeinu. We stopped at some point. I think Rosh Chodesh Adar. I stopped that. Right? There are still shuls in America doing that.
Right.
We do one parak of Tehillim after every davening. I don't do 2 or 3. I've been in shuls in America where every Monday and Thursday, or even sometimes every day after davening, I always say Tehillim.
Right.
Mishbeach for the Medina, Mishbeach for the Tzahal, Mishbeach for the Chatufim. So we don't do that.
Right.
It wasn't a conscious decision to be different, but I think you're probably right in your assessment of why we're
you're
different.
driving the billboards, the signs on the sides of buildings, the sign on the bus, the news every time you turn it on, and the daily living in life, and you people who are looking around their homes, and there are people who aren't there because they're serving reservists, fathers, sons, and it may not be as necessary. So you're balancing that. You got the kehillah on your back, and you also have your family. So let's talk about, if it's okay for a moment, your children, your son-in-law, where they've been serving, what that's been like. How do you sleep at night? How do you bear the responsibility of all that you're doing and navigate that? I know Yaakov, we connected through. And maybe you won't even describe your relationship to the Ger Mishpacha, and that connection. And he really was really helpful to me, introducing me to the Ger Rosh Yeshiva and that relationship with Shaul Alter, bringing Rav Shaul to Boca, to our community, something I cherish and look back at. And every visit to Israel I've been on, I've had the opportunity to see him. And Yaakov deserves a lot of credit for that in making that relationship. And sadly, he couldn't be in Boca for that event where our shul was packed and was incredible, and people are still talking about it because he was serving at that time. He put it together, he put it in motion, and then he couldn't be there. So tell us what Yaakov, what the others have been up to, and what's it like being a parent of children serving?
It's just my daughter, my oldest. She's married, thank God, and we have a grandson who's 1 year old. So her husband, Naftali, my very beloved son-in-law, so he had served in the army when he was younger. In fact, their entire courtship was while he was serving. They got married just a few weeks after he finished the army. So he was called back to Miluim, emergency on Simchas Torah. My son Yaakov, who you alluded to, had just finished Hesder. So he's in his first year post-Hesder. He was still learning, actually in the Grus Kollel in Yerushalayim, your old stomping grounds.
Right.
And he got called from the dance floor, from Hakafos to go in Miluim. And then my second son, Yosef, who is still also in active duty in service, he is in Hesder. He's in the Yeshiva in Yerucham. He had started the army Pesach time last year, so he is still, in his service. So of those 3, Yosef has been serving uninterruptedly because he's not a reserve. He's still through Sukkot, he'll still be full time in the army. He happens to have had allergies, so he wasn't in a combat unit, but he serves in a kind of strategic / Modi'in type job, a very important job as part of Pikudat Tzafon, the Northern Command, which is outside of Tzfat. And he's had an incredibly intense service from the beginning. His base is so important that there's a mirror, it's out of a movie, there's a mirror of that whole base, a number of stories below ground, because God forbid, they can't have any interruption of the command and control.
Right.
They're in charge of the whole north. So he's been underground for most of the last 8-9 months. So bli ayin hara, we're not worried about his physical safety, but he has had an incredibly stressful service, much more than he would have anticipated, given what's going on in the north. And in addition, sadly, he's a Talmud in the Yeshiva of Yerucham. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's 9 Talmidim who have been killed. He was friendly with pretty much all of them. And one of them in particular was his Charusa, one of his best friends. So it's the challenges of trying to be a parent for children who have lost friends. And all of my children.
And he can't grieve. He doesn't have time. He doesn't have the luxury of wallowing in sadness and in grief because the intelligence and his service can't wait. So that's all being shelved right now, and we don't begin to appreciate or understand.
No.
And we'll get to your Tzalash work in a moment, but we don't begin to understand what this country, those who are serving and their family and the concentric circles around them, how much is right now being stifled and not being experienced. You can't lean in, you can't grieve, and what that means down the road in terms of the trauma the country is going to recover from. So he's had to grow up way too fast, losing his Chavrusa.
He's 21.
Friend.
He's been in 9 funerals, including a best friend.
80.
Yes. So that's Yosef, who has had uninterrupted service, more or less, and in his unique situation. Yaakov, my son, and Naftali, my son-in-law, so they are combat soldiers, and they are in reserves. So they were both called up. The way it just worked out randomly, Yaakov and his unit was sent to the Lebanon border on Simchas Torah, and Naftali, my son-in-law, was sent to the south. The way it worked out was that Naftali, 2.5 months into the war, was given his first break, his first shichrur, and he, in theory, is supposed to be a student in engineering at Machon Lev, learning in Rav Rimon's Kollel, studying engineering. But, he was obviously missed the first few months of the school year until they eventually started. Then he's been back, and now he got called a second time. He's already finished 2 tours as a reservist since the war has begun. Baruch Hashem, He's physically fine. Again, he also lost close friends on Simchas Torah, and since then, but he is, as far as I know, served with great distinction as an officer. As I mentioned, one of my own congregants was in his unit, and he has had 2 different tours. And at the moment, he's back home, Baruch Hashem, with my daughter, my grandson, and trying to figure out how to make up for all the lost time and keep up his college and his grades, which is not an easy thing. That's Naftali. Yaakov, as I mentioned, was sent to the Lebanon border, and he, as it happens, instead of 2.5 months, he had over 5 months, basically, where he was full-time in. So first of all, the length of that was very, very intense and very difficult for him.
Grueling.
And I think now most of us know how dangerous the North is. I think in the beginning, for obvious reasons, all of our attention was focused on the South and Gaza, and a lot of us didn't realize how bad the North was even from the beginning.
Right.
And Yaakov, way after I'm not sure, honestly, I don't remember. Time has had a funny way of playing games with our heads the last year. But I can't remember if this was toward the end of his service or he was already out. But at some point he was home for Shabbos, and he was sitting on a Shabbos afternoon with me and my wife. And he mentioned that, I think the number he said was 6 times. He thought this was it. That was on the Lebanon border. Again, stuff that people didn't even know about at the time was going on in Lebanon in terms of the rockets over their heads and things like that. And the first one he told us about, was on Simchas Torah. He said, when we were running to the north, he ran home, got his gear, and then ran out the north. We were under the assumption that we were within days of invading Lebanon. I think a lot of that has somewhat come out. I guess it's hard to know, depending on which news you follow and which podcasts you listen to, but I think it is somewhat public now that there was a big discussion and even a debate within the senior Israeli, whether they were going to go in or not. I think there was a huge argument. I don't know who was right and who was wrong, but some of the soldiers, including Yaakov's officers, thought they were going in, and apparently that wasn't a crazy rumor because it almost happened.
Yeah.
And he said, we all knew we had to do it. We didn't hesitate, but we all thought we were going to die. He's 24.
Right.
And he had other times where drones hitting his position or rockets over their heads. There's no Iron Dome where he was. He wasn't on a base. He was just like in a tent. And for a while, he was like camouflaged like a bush, like on the Lebanon border.
I was just thinking yesterday, Rabbi Gottlieb, about the difference between young people in America right now and in Israel, where the young people in Israel are the hope and they are the future and they are so strong and resilient and they are the source of our strength and our faith and our optimism. And there's so much to believe in. And young people, I'm not talking about within the Jewish community, but I'm just talking about the culture of millennials and younger, and I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but of which there's such spoiled and entitled and confused and almost hopeless. And that contrast of what the war has brought out of the young people that I know so many are leaning on in this country, looking at those young people who aren't young. They may be young chronologically, they're young in their years or age, but they're not young in their life experience. And what that means for the future, in many ways, may be positive, growing up and maturing, but in other ways, the scars and the fears, and that takes away from life. And when you think you're not going to live and you don't know what's going to happen, and you're bracing yourself to go in and will it and won't it and what's going to happen. But Yaakov, all of them, they're just amazing.
Thank you. So he finished that first tour, I think it was around Purim time, about 5 months into the war. But then he recently got called back. And now he is down south. I'm not sure I'm supposed to talk too much about what he's doing. Not because it's so top secret, but because I don't think he wants his mother to know. Yeah. But he's not in the north anymore. Now he's doing things, on both sides of the border, let's just say, in the south of Israel. But hopefully that's only 40 days, and then hopefully he'll be back. But so those are the 3 of them, and each one of them have lost friends, as I mentioned. Baruch Hashem and Bli Ayin Hara, none of them have scars that you can see. But they all have scars you can't see. Right. And they're real.
And then may in some ways be harder to treat.
Yeah.
Because you can't see them and the world doesn't see them. And it's important that we, the whole Jewish community around the world, not disappear, because the treatment for those scars don't go in a duffel bag. You can't put them in a lal. You can't buy it at Costco, but they're also going to need a lot of support, and we're not going anywhere for that.
I appreciate that.
Quick tangent.
Please. Your
connection with the Alter family. How did Yaakov get connected to Ger? Did you have a relationship with the Pnei Menachem's Rebbe who just passed away? And I know Rav Shaul and his brothers were just sitting Shiva.
Yes.
Yaakov may be the most of your family to lean into that, but you also, what's that connection?
So the answer is that when I was in Yeshiva, 18, 19 years old, and even before that, I grew up on my mother's side knowing that I'm an Ura Einikel of the Chidush Harim. I'm a great-grandchild. I'm a descendant of the Chidush Harim. Has not always been exactly clear how that was. That's one of the benefits of Chassidus.
Right.
Their definition of yichus is a little bit broader.
Right.
But I know it's real because when I was in 18 and 19, and I went to Ger. I would go for a Shabbos. I went to visit the Pnei Menachem. My first year in yeshiva was the last year of the Lev Simcha's life. You couldn't talk to him. He was already incapacitated, but you could see him. And I spent a Shabbos in Ger as a first-year student, and I went to see him. And then my second year was when the Pnei Menachem took over. Lev Simcha died, so I was there. And one of the last things I did in Israel was go to the Pnei Menachem to talk to him about I wanted to stay a third year. My parents wanted me to go to YU. And he even said to me when I told him about YU, he says in Hebrew, "Oh, that's the yeshiva of Rav Yashaber." I didn't even know he knew about YU or Rav Soloveitchik, but he knew. And he encouraged me to go back and then afterwards to make aliyah. But we already discussed the fact that I didn't do that. So I had a family connection. My mother grew up with the same mentality. Oh yeah, we grew up as Ger Hasidim in terms of our lineage. By the time I grew up, my grandfather was clean shaven. He was a Holocaust survivor. He wore a gartel and a hat, but he didn't look like a Ger Chassid.
Right.
But when he was a kid, before the war, he absolutely looked like a Ger Chassid. He grew up a Ger Chassid.
So you knew it from your youth. You knew it. You carried it with pride.
100%. So we had on and off relationships when levels, I should say, of connection. When my Zaidi died, my family was very involved in dedicating not only the Beis Medrash in Borough Park, but also then a Beis Yaakov of Ger in Ashdod. So we've had connections to various members of the Ger Mishpacha and leadership over the years. But it was more of like, when we wanted, and it was more of we dabbled, if you will. And as you said, of all of the grandchildren, all of whom I think are proud of this relationship, but Yaakov has taken it most to heart, partially because he has a Chassidish heart. He loves Chassidus. He loves learning it. He loves the social milieu of it, the Avodas Hashem part of it. He loves all of it. And he happened to have been in yeshiva getting into learning of Chassidus, like so many young people, even without our family connection. So many young people in our generation are interested now in Chassidus. He was no different, and especially he was interested in Sfas Emes because of the family connection. And he had remembered when he was 13, we were already living in Israel, I took him, before his bar mitzvah, to meet Reb Shaul Alter and the Ger Rebbe. You could still do both of those on the same day.
Right, at the time.
Yes, that's the 11 years ago, excuse me. So it was one of his first years in yeshiva when Reb Shaul Alter went out on his own. And like Yaakov had this epiphany, like, whoa, that's the one that I met when I was 13 or 12 and a half. And he really loved him then. Shaul Alter was very personable and related even to this Anglo, almost 13-year-old boy even then. So all of a sudden now Yaakov at this point is a first or second year Beis Medrash. He's a Ben Torah. He's learning Chassidus. And Rav Shaul Alter is starting out this new Beis Medrash. And he started going and developed a relationship. And Rav Shaul Alter remembered him and remembered my grandfather. And before he drafted, Yaakov drafted right after the Pesach of the original Corona year. That year you could even have Seder with your parents. Everything was
2020, yeah.
And he sent Yaakov a handwritten letter, a bracha before Yaakov drafted. Atah chayal shali, you are my chayal. And anytime you are out and free, always come to me, see me. You're always invited. Be safe, begufu b'nefesh. And all of Yaakov's original service, whenever he would have a Shabbos off or a time off, he would always visit, sometimes before he came home, to visit Rav Shaul Alter. So he has kept up that connection now for a number of years, and it's really a tremendous
He shared a voice
bracha.
note with me before Shavuos. I'm sure it wasn't just with me, but he shared a voice note with me that he spent his Shavuos, I guess, in service and was concerned the environment, the circumstance wouldn't be the Kabbalah Satorah that he was hoping for. And that Rav Shaul Alter told him, Yaakov, don't forget, the Torah was originally given in a desert. You'll be okay. You could accept the Torah in a desert.
That was incredible. Another thing, I'm not sure if he shared with you, it's also gone viral, and he's very humble, so he often takes his name off of things. I hope he won't be upset at me for sharing this now. But when in the middle of his initial service, he wrote a letter to Shaul's younger brother, Rav Daniel, who's also a very significant Talmid Chacham and one of the leaders of that new community, talking about how do I keep Shabbos in the army? This is something that bothered him even when he was younger, a few years ago when he was just in regular Hesder. He spent one day in the summer going to NCSY Kolol to visit Rav Shechter, who was visiting at the time, and Rav Shaul Alter to ask about how do I makabel Shabbos while I'm driving a Jeep being Machal Shabbos.
Right.
So this is something that's always been on him. And it wasn't then or now a halachic question as much because it's pretty clear what the right thing to do is, but emotionally. So more recently, during the war, he sent this letter to Rabbi Daniel, who wrote him back a very beautiful, short but beautiful letter, how you're not being Mechal Shabbos, you are being Shomer Shabbos by being Shomer on the Jewish people. Now this letter, it's been published even widely in Hasidic circles. It doesn't mention Yaakov by name. It says dear, in Hebrew, and then it's raised out, which is what he has no interest in it being public. But to the point that some of the more extremist elements in the Hasidic world felt that this was so to speak, too Zionistic or too supportive of a soldier. Like that's how viral this has gone, that Rav Daniel and Rav Shaul even
that's how warm and affectionate it was.
They've gotten criticized for it.
Yeah.
So that's also Yaakov had his chus of being someone who facilitated that incredible letter as well. So he has this very beautiful relationship, and our family has an ongoing relationship. You mentioned that Rav Shaul Alter's mother just passed away, so we did have a relationship with her. As I mentioned, the Pnei Menachem died very young, tragically. But then when my family was very involved in doing things and marrying my grandfather, the Pnei Menachem had already just died. But we kept an ongoing relationship with his Rebbetzin. My mother came for many years on my Zaydi's yurtzeit. She came, he's buried in Har Menuchos. My mother comes to visit. And she and my bubby, when she was still alive, and my aunt would visit with the Ger Rebbetzin, who spoke multiple languages, including Yiddish, Hebrew, and English, and I think a few others. She was very, very smart. And they have actually did have an ongoing relationship with
Beautiful.
her.
So I know you're. Thank you for your time. You're in a little bit of a rush because you are on your way to a barbecue at an army base, something that you do with some relative frequency. Not only as a father of Chayalim and a Rabbi of Kehillat that has Chayalim, but in your capacity of Tzalash. So on that zigzag tour of your career, leaving Baltimore, you never anticipated probably is your role now in Tzalash. So talk to our audience. Tell them, those who don't know, what is Tzalash? Why is it important? Why was it important before the war? What are some of the things that it's doing? And you just shared this new sefer I'm really excited about also. Tell us what this is and what it's about.
Thank you so much. So Tzalash is an Israeli organization which is dedicated to the support and providing support for the religious and emotional needs of soldiers and their families. We are not one of the ad hoc initiatives that started after the war. There have been many of those, and they're very wonderful. But understandably, they'll probably also disappear after the war. But we are now in our 11th year. So we've been doing this for many years, and we will continue doing it as long as there is a tzahal. I've been involved for 3 full years now. I'm just about to start my 4th year. And that was a zag in my career. But basically, when my son Yaakov was in the army all those years ago, I became acquainted, again, as an Oleh, as an Anglo, first time as a parent, even more so than having had students, of the religious challenges of being in the army. And I want to stress, because the army is doing anything deliberately antagonistic to the religious soldiers. On the contrary, in my experience, the army is parv to positive to religious soldiers. You can have isolated incidents, a difficult commander, but overall the army is very supportive. But just the nature of the work, it is so intense, it is so exhaustive, it requires all of your physical and even mental energy. It doesn't always leave room for positive, religious experiences, the amount of time and energy it takes to invest in your relationship with Hashem. It's not an easy thing. So, a myriad of different challenges. And I first became aware of it through seeing what Yaakov was struggling with initially when he was in the army. And it was a tremendous bracha to us that there was this organization, which I at that time had never heard of, called Tzalash. A rabbi named Rav Peretz Einhorn, who's the founder of Tzalash, who I at that point had never heard of. And Hashem orchestrated it that they came into Yaakov's life, and he, Rav Peretz particularly, helped Yaakov a lot in his service. So I started the volunteering. I would record Divrei Torah for Yaakov, originally in English, to share with his friends. Eventually, Rav Peretz asked me to do it in Hebrew for other soldiers. And I started as a donor. Not the biggest donor, I would add.
What, Tzalash is an acronym?
Yes, I'm sorry. So Tzalash, thank you, is Tzava L'Shem Shemayim. Tzadik Lamed Shin, Tzava L'Shem Shemayim. Ukishmo, Kenhu. We are there to help the religious soldiers and help them be as devoted to Torah and Avodas Hashem as they want to be. We don't pressure anybody. There's no hard sell kiruv. It's for anyone who wants that emotional and religious support. Absolutely. We have no agenda about who goes to the army. We avoid that whole discussion. But if you're in the army, we want to help you be as religious as possible and specifically as connected to Torah. And that's what I saw Yaakov benefit from. I started helping out a little bit, as I say, a volunteer, donating whatever I could afford. And then, as I say, almost 3+ years ago, Rabbi Einhorn or Peretz came to see me and he said, I need a partner. It was a startup. He felt he had gotten as far as he could on his own. He had some employees, but no one on a senior level like him. And he asked me to join him. And I said no, 3 times actually.
Yeah.
Not because of the Shulchan Aruch, just
Like
because I really wasn't,
yeah.
I wasn't interested. And I had my own career ready. I'd finally landed on 2 feet.
Yeah.
I was looking to start over again 3 years ago.
Right.
But he was so sincere and so idealistic. And he just couldn't understand what I meant when I said no.
Right.
The Jewish people need us.
He didn't take no for an answer. So tell us some of what Tzalash does. What are some of the examples? It's a beautiful image. The idea that the army, a person shouldn't feel that the highest level you could get to is not losing religion.
Correct.
The goal shouldn't just be not to lose religion. The goal should be, why can't you be having a religious experience and religious growth
that's
even in that setting?
exactly. Again, my partner and the founder, Rabbi Peretz, always preaches this internally when we have our meetings, but also to the soldiers themselves when he visits. And basically, the idea is very complicated, but to be simple is to put it in simple words. I guess you could say, obviously, the format of how they're going to express their religiosity is going to be different when they're serving. If they're coming from yeshiva, especially, they went from yeshiva to the front lines or even just to an army base, you can't compare. But it's really a mindset. You are an Eved Hashem, you are a Ben Torah. And that doesn't change because you're in the army. Well, how much time you have to daven to learn, of course, that's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
But we want you to see everything, including the army service, the push-ups, the running, the shooting, everything, as part of your avodas Hashem. It is a mitzvah, incredible mitzvah to defend Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. It's part of your avodas Hashem. You're not on break. It's not that it's such an important mitzvah that all others are off.
Right.
It is that it's an expression of your avodas Hashem. Not only if you have that attitude, will that uplift and transform all of the physical things you're doing as a soldier, which is already a huge win. If you see all of those as a religious expression.
Right.
But it will also hopefully give you the mindset, the frame of mind, and the inspiration and strength that when you do have the free time to make sure that not only did you daven, but learn and other things. The main diagnosis, I would say, and this is the key to everything we do, is that I think most people think of the challenge. First of all, they think that we should only play defense,
right,
not just offense, like you said, but also they think of it exclusively in terms of the exposure to whatever negative elements you could imagine. And anything you're imagining is probably true.
Yeah.
Because, of course, it's not a simple environment. Clearly not. And our approach is that while those things are absolutely potentially vulnerabilities, but they're actually downstream. The most fundamental question is the mindset and remaining connected to some level of Torah study.
So what does Tzalash do to make that connection, keep that connection?
So leave aside the war, because that's one big parenthesis, because everything has changed. The soldiers and their missions have changed, and therefore we had to adapt. Like the barbecue thing you mentioned, which I think is very important. We never did a single barbecue before the war.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying we won't continue doing it after the war because we've found the beauty in that, but our focus is on 10 different things, which would involve visiting the soldiers, visiting their bases. We have, thank God, Kanai and Har now a very growing staff. We're growing tremendously. We've tripled in the last 3 years. But a growing staff that visits the soldiers regularly, up and down throughout the Army, all the different combat units, to connect with them, to meet with them, and to encourage their own independent learning, and also to learn with them. So to take one example, which we're maybe most famous for, we have published probably well over 100,000 volumes of little pocket-sized Gemaras, paperback that fit in the soldiers' pockets, not only to encourage them to be able to be learning while they're working and doing their service, but often we'll do visits. We're not just there to give a shiur. We do give shiurim, and other organizations also do it. It's all wonderful. But that's not really the secret sauce. We want them to have active experiences. So we will transform that base into a base medrash. Maybe there's only 45 minutes, no problem. We pass out these Gemaras. We'll say, okay, now we are going to learn Maseches Beitza or Sukkah. And every 2 guys go, you do Daf Bet, you do Daf Gimel, you do Daf Daled. And then within 35, 40 minutes, all of a sudden this unit that maybe last night was rolling around in the mud and crawling under a tank or who knows what they were doing, now they just made a siyum on a Masechet as a team. And the guy who was who knows what last night now has his friend on his shoulders, and they're singing Torah Hashem to Bima.
Right.
It's a transformative experience. It gives them a little bit of a taste. If they didn't pick up a sefer and all the time they were in the army or whatever, who could blame them?
Yeah.
You could easily defend it halachically, forget emotionally. It's not about that though.
It's not only impacting their own personal growth, it's impacting the morale, the army.
Exactly. So it's not about blame if they don't do it, but you can't at any age, let alone their age, go that long without an injection of the positive religious experience. So
Tzalash has been making spiritual barbecues for the soldiers long before the war.
Exactly. And these siyumim, again, they uplift the soldiers. They commit. And what you just said, by the way, very perceptive. We have been getting feedback anecdotally, even from mid-level officers, and including in one case, we have it on our website, a testimonial from one of the most senior generals a few years ago in the Army, who's not religious at all, about how grateful the Army as an institution, on an official level, is grateful to Tzalash because we give so much motivation to the religious soldiers, and they are fine.
Yeah, the soldier is not just religiously holding on or feeling shame or guilt for religiously slipping or sliding, but feels they're still in a growth mode, is going to be a more
because also
soldier.
Our whole attitude is not only to push the learning, but it's part of a framework in which they see their Army service as a mission.
Religious experience. Tell us about the sefer.
So they're very motivated. So I mentioned that I was very hesitant initially to join. What pushed me over the edge was a conversation with Rav Asher Weiss. And after I explained my own doubts and what else I was doing as a Rebbe, and I'd have to give that up, but I'd have less time for my own learning, my own teaching. Is it even right to give that up? So at the time, Rav Asher said to me, to help the Chayalim is Kadosh Kadashim. There is nothing more important. So with that, somebody of that level says something that's that clear to you, that cut through my hesitation. And literally walking out of his office 3+ years ago, I called my wife and said, I'm doing it.
Right.
Fast forward to the war. So shortly after the war began, when we finally just had recovered from our own shock, and Tzalash also was completely caught by surprise. I don't just mean as average citizens, but every other male but me was called up, including Mr. F. Peretz, who's 40+ years and maybe not in the best shape. So now he's in the Rabbanut, but he was in a uniform away from his family for months. Right. All the young guys I told you about who were doing all these base visits, they were called up on Miluim. It was me and a few women who were left running, and we all of a sudden had a new mission. And we were doing tons of things that we had never done before, getting huge numbers of religious objects and resources to a quantity of soldiers and reservists far greater than anything we had been used to. So we were doing all sorts of things, but we were kind of just getting over our shock, kind of getting our footing 3 or 4 weeks into the war, when there was a request from soldiers who were already getting huge things from us. I was going to army bases up and down the coast from north to south every day at that point, delivering chumashim and sidurim and these gemaras and mishnayos and tons of things. And the soldiers asked me, do you think it would be possible to get Minchas Asher, Rav Asher Weiss's farm? I was totally skeptical. I take no credit for the idea. I said, are you sure? I mean, those aren't easy svarim.
Right. That's what you're going to learn in the field?
Right. In the war?
Right.
So I ended up speaking to 2 different soldiers. I didn't accept one. I wanted 2 Adim, 2 different people I asked without explaining even why. I just said, if I could get you, would you, your friends, do you think? And I asked 2 different people from 2 different units. And when they both said yes, I drove to Ramot and I went to Rav Asher Weiss, who of course knew me and knew the organization. And I said to him, we'd like to do it. At that point, it was for Bereshis. Yeah. Minchas Asher on Bereshis. And he, I want you to know, I don't think he'll be embarrassed to admit, he was also skeptical. Really? So I said, Rav Asher, listen, there's a request. I think let's do 1,000 copies of a volume on Bereshis. So I worked with his son-in-law, Rav Banish, and together we picked which pieces would be on every parsha of Bereshis, 1 halacha and 1 agada. In a few days, we raised the money, we put together. I said, I'll take care of everything. I just need your bracha. Right. Published the book. In 2 days, 1,000 copies were gone. We printed another 1,000. Then we did Hanukkah. Then we did Shmos. Then we did Purim. This volume now on Bamidbar is our 8th volume. Amazing. And we've printed in these 8 now almost 20,000 copies. I cannot tell you how many pictures, how many videos I have, and I've shown them to Rav Asher, and he is so touched by every one, of soldiers on the Lebanon border, in Khan Yunis, in Rafah, in buildings with no electricity, where sometimes I have videos of people thanking me with the all they have is one of those like minor lights
Right.
on their headbands,
Learning
and
with
you can
that.
hear the bombs in the background.
Yeah.
And they're learning Minchas
they're
Usher.
studying
It's
Minchas Usher.
incredible
Tremendous.
what they have. So this is one of, not the only, but our latest and maybe our
Tremendous.
most exciting project.
All right, Rabbi Gottlieb, we could speak for hours and hours. Thank you for all that you're doing. Really, really incredible.
It is incredible.
And please, God, your children should come home, and the hostages should come home. The soldiers should be
Amen.
safe. And you should go back to helping soldiers grow while they're in their active duty, because that's their role, but without any threat to their lives or without any war that they're fighting. And your Kehillah should continue to grow in safety and security, and Russia should never have to be about wars again. And thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for your friendship, and thank you for making time with us today.
I appreciate it. I thank you for having me, and I thank you for all the incredible work you're doing. First of all, I know you and your shul have been among the leaders in helping the soldiers and helping people in Israel, so thank you for everything that you've done in that regard, and thank you for help leading a flourishing community in Boca. I don't know what Hashem has in mind for Anglo Jewry, for American Jewry, or for Boca. It's way above my pay grade, but you are doing great things where you
Appreciate
are,
it.
and hopefully one day
We'll find out.
those great things can also
We'll let
take
you
place
know
in
as soon
Israel.
as soon as we find out, we'll let you know. Please, God, we'll be here together. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Akiva, thank you so much for coming from Kiryat Shmona to be with us and to give us a little bit of insight into what's happening. The Jewish world, the whole world, has been very focused on the Gaza border, Gaza itself, following the news of what's happening up north, but really not appreciating what life has been like for residents of the north, many of whom have been evacuated. I understand that many is close to 100,000. I just heard from someone that they got a letter from the government saying they shouldn't expect to go home until at least June 2025, which is a year from now to begin going home, which is hard to imagine. I know you're still in Kiryat Shmona, which I thought everyone was evacuated. So thank you for being with us and letting us get a little bit insight, education, and feel more for what's happening up there. So you're still there? Are there residents still in Kiryat Shmona now?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. And basically, in Kiryat Shmona, there's about 25,000 residents. I mean, in normal times. At the beginning of the war, 8 months ago, they evacuated 23,000 residents. There are currently now still about 2,000 residents who are still in Kiryat Shmona. Some of them are elderly people who just lived there the whole entire life and been there all of the wars in Israel. And they're not going to go away, not from anything.
Right.
And some of the people also, there's a lot of personnel that still work in Kiryat Shmona. You know, if it's this municipality, the city hall, if it's the medical center.
Essential workers.
Essential workers, basically. Police and all that. So there's about 2,000 residents still in Kiryat Shmona.
For those who don't know, where is Kiryat Shmona?
Okay, so we have the Upper Galil, way near, right just outside the border of Lebanon, where there's a few kibbutzim. There's Metula, Margaliot, Manara. We're right at the edge there, not so far from the Mount Hermon, whoever knows. Half an hour from the Mount Hermon. We're about 20 minutes from the Lebanese border, I mean by car. Very beautiful place. A lot of beautiful scenery, mountains.
Very beautiful. I've been there many times. A wonderful place to visit. So you're one of the 2,000 residents who has stayed during this time? When you weren't on Miluim and
I was
serving
going to say
and
part of the
fighting?
time. So the first part, I was first 4 months I was in active duty in the war from October 7th. Then when I got out, around the middle of February, so I came back to Kiryat Shmona, and I've been there in the central of Israel, you know, back and forth, living there as much as you can. And
So I want to hear more about your active duty. But first, Kiryat Shmona, what's it been like since February while you've been back? We've been reading a lot of stories about the fires that started from their missiles, the drones, the drone attacks, the danger. I've been a lot of sirens. Do they even have sirens? Is there enough time for sirens to go off? What's life like daily for those 2,000 residents who are still in Kiryat Shmona?
let's start and say it's not life. I don't know what people have a sense of what life is, but it's not a life. I mean, people live there. Well, a bit of people live there, but the town is empty. You drive and you see empty streets. There's no cars. You don't see people walking around with dogs or whatever. The town is empty, essentially empty. I can even tell you, when you drive around the city, even the traffic lights, sometimes they turn them off. Why? They don't want cars to stop in intersections and maybe get hit by direct missiles.
Wow.
You need to understand that, first of all, the alarms does work in Kiryat Shmona. You have 10 seconds, not always. A lot of the times you first hear the boom, explosion, then you hear the alarm comes on. Sometimes when they shoot a lot of missiles, so that's when people start like really running to shelters, because if they shoot only one missile, then if you're near a shelter and you manage to get there in the few seconds, then okay, and if not, then not. The Hezbollah, when they shoot rockets at there's three kinds of things they do. First, they have the long missiles, that they shoot from Lebanon. They have direct missiles. That's when you just pick up your weapon, aim, and shoot. You look for a target and shoot. And the third one is the drones, all the suicide drones or explosive, where it's slower because they don't go as fast as like direct missiles and all that. But still, they come, you don't always see them. The Iron Dome doesn't always manage to, exactly. So that's also part of the things we get attacked with. So that's the life in Kiryat Shmona. Every day you wake up and it's not a question of if it's going to happen. It's a question more of like when part of the day it's going to happen. So that's about the...
And the when is that the siren will go off, you'll have to run to a shelter.
Yeah.
Not if, but when, or how many times that day that will happen.
Look, it really depends. It could be either 5-10 times a day. It could be also once a day. Last week they had their festival, so they didn't even shoot it all. But usually it happens like on a daily basis. You hear sirens all the time. It is what it is.
And that's the definition of terror. The whole idea of terror is it terrorizes, and that you can't live life normally, and people have to evacuate their homes. And anyone who thinks that there's not a war, right? There's a lot of conversation. Will war break out in the north? But I don't know what the definition of war is. If tens of thousands of people having to evacuate their home is not even losing a war, then I don't know what war is. So there is a war, and like you described, it's not a life.
The war started October 7. I think everybody knows that. I think not everybody understands that the war that broke out, not only against Hezbollah, against Hamas in Gaza, started there. The reason why the whole north was evacuated pretty quickly, because there was a fear that it's only a matter of time until Hezbollah is going to cross the border,
Right.
start butchering everybody there.
Right.
They evacuated everyone. Hezbollah didn't have to even shoot one rocket, and 80,000 residents were out of the north already. You could say he already won the war. I mean, from that point of view, that, every day that 80,000 people are not having their lives there, that's like it's a war at the end of the day. It's a war at the end of the day.
Sure.
So, look, the army obviously does shoot back, and there is there's active war going on. There's explosives. You can always hear explosions. You can hear our missiles, their missiles all the time. It's a war zone at the end of the day. That's the definition of war zone. The war continues, and the thing is that just no one knows exactly when it's going to end, because it's a war, but like you just said, it's a war against a terrorist organization. It's not like a war against a state. We are used to, also Israel itself, used to 6-day war, but we used to fight against states.
Right.
Much easier, from a point of view. And it's very understandable when the war finishes is once you beat their army, whatever.
Right. What's the definition of the success here?
Yeah, so I was just saying that this war, we're fighting against the terrorist organizations, obviously, and how can you define what do you define finishing the war or winning the war? I think that everybody now understands that the only way to finish a war is to defeat, destroy evil or the terrorist organization,
Sure.
destroy them, not making with them deals for them to break again and again and again.
Right.
Just destroying.
Destroy them. Have there been fires in Kiryat Shmona? Have the drones or missiles led to fires?
Yes. So a few weeks ago, there were very, very, very big fires. Started near Kiryat Shmona in the mountains there from a missile that exploded, and there was extreme weather those days. It was very hot. So the fire got caught very quickly, and the fire went all the way down from the mountains to Kiryat Shmona, to the first lines of houses, also to the yeshiva, which is also located pretty high in Kiryat Shmona, in the mountain. It was a struggle. I mean, everybody worked, not only the fire department. I was going to say, even the fire department couldn't even send the planes, that help with the water. They couldn't even bring them up because they were afraid that Hezbollah will shoot them down.
This is right.
So everybody has to work together, the army, the fire department, even civilians who just came out and tried to help as much as they can to fight, to make sure that the fire doesn't start burning down entire neighborhoods. There were buildings that got affected from the fire. It burned down. But basically we managed to prevent the fire from entering. The whole city but was smoke for days. Like heavy smoke. You couldn't even breathe there. You couldn't walk around. It was difficult. I was going to say, but the severe damages in Kiryat Shmona, not from the fire, from all the rockets. There are over 400 homes, apartments that got damaged by the rockets. Really? Yeah, drones, rockets, everything.
That Iron Dome didn't shoot them down, or shrapnel from Iron Dome, or because there's no residents there, they're not rushing to shoot them down?
I guess it's all of the above. Yeah. Iron Dome does manage to take care of most of them, but not 100% all of them. So obviously it probably misses here and there. Sometimes they believe it's going to fall in somewhere else. It falls I don't know where. And there's shrapnels also. The shrapnels make a lot of damage.
Wow. Now you mentioned you're a graduate of you mentioned the yeshiva, the Hesder yeshiva in Kiryat Shmona. You're a graduate of that yeshiva. I have a nephew who learned and is studying, still part of the Hesder of that yeshiva. It's so difficult for a yeshiva to relocate because the guys who signed up to go there didn't sign up to go in another city. And the Rebbeim, who's a big part of yeshiva experience, being able to go to a Rebbe's home, if a Rebbe doesn't have a home because he's evacuated or is in Miluim, it also compromises the experience. So, and despite that, you were mentioning the yeshiva has signed up for next year. How many new Shana Aleph guys?
30 students.
30 new students for Shana Aleph, despite being dislocated, relocated, which really is an extraordinary testament to the yeshiva.
Yes, I want to say even more than that. It was difficult also because the yeshiva is very connected to the city. We did a lot of activities with the students and the residents in the city. The yeshiva helps a lot needy organizations to hand out a lot of packages for the needy people. There's a lot of projects that the yeshiva does with the city.
Make bar mitzvahs, I know.
Bar mitzvah, yeah, also bar mitzvah project, and there's a lot of projects. I was saying that the yeshiva moved the army relocated them in Nechalim near Petach Tikva, just outside. And it was difficult because the yeshiva, like all the other evacuees from the city, are just scattered all over the country, and the connection is very, it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeshiva,
The rabbis who have their own families, talking about the rabbis in the yeshiva, they have their own families to take care of, and they're also evacuated, and they're not in Nechalim. Some of them live they're renting now in Efrat, and in Jerusalem, Netanya, all over the country. And they have to drive every day, an hour at least, to the yeshiva, every day back and forth. The whole operation of doing the yeshiva in Nechalim is complicated.
Wow. And you were back in Kiryat Shmona in February, but before that, from October 7th, you were called back up. What unit do you serve in the Army?
So I serve in a combat engineering unit. We deal with mines and explosives. Especially with finding tunnels and exploding them. So
what are you allowed to share with us about that? What does it mean to find a tunnel? And we've seen a lot of videos come out where they were able to track the opening of the tunnel, sometimes in a child's bedroom, sometimes in a school, in a hospital. But what does it mean to destroy the tunnel?
We found the beginning of tunnels, like you said, also in schools and also in children's rooms and houses and everything. First of all, when you locate a new tunnel, you discover one, you have to make sure that it's not booby-trapped or anything to see that, there's no terrorists or it's hiding behind whatever.
Right.
Once we clear that part, we check the whole compound, if it's a school or whatever. If the army decides he wants to destroy it for some reason, then we destroy it. And if not, then we don't destroy it and we continue to look for other either it's terrorists or other tunnels. But the beginning, when we went into Gaza, we didn't find like a few tunnels. We found dozens of tunnels all over.
Whole network, an entire subway system.
Whole subway system. Everybody, I think, was completely amazed. And we're talking about like a few meters from the border.
Right.
And I was going to say that we know the same thing is also waiting for us in Lebanon. Hezbollah also dug a lot of tunnels. Hamas didn't make up the tunnel thing. They learned it from Hezbollah. They learned it from Iran. At the end of the day, this is something that we know that it's also going to wait for us when we go, if there's going to be a war in Lebanon. I mean, there is an active war in Lebanon, but I mean like a war where we try to destroy a terrorist organization. We know that at the end of the day, there's a lot of tunnels there. Think about it. We're talking about meters away from residents' homes on the border.
Yeah.
No one can really live there when you know there's a terrorist organization
ready to walk in. So what do you hope happens in the north? And there's talk about diplomatically trying to push Hezbollah back behind the river. And if they're willing to go, then maybe diplomatically we can walk things back. The other hand, there are people who argue, don't believe them or don't enter into a diplomatic conclusion. We have to go in. We have to destroy them at their core, at their source. They'll have rockets. It'll be a painful time, but we can only live in peace and only can return those residents to the north if we have. So how do you hope it ends?
Look, no one wants war. At the end of the day, we just want to be left alone, live in peace and quiet. The fact is, the reality now, how it is, cannot stay up north. People are not going to come back to their homes when they know that there's a terrorist organization on the fence. Now, it's not like I want to rush in and, like you said, it'll be a war, it'll be a painful time, a lot of casualties and everything. But on the other hand, we know that the deals, it's not going to hold up. Last time, 2006, after the Second Lebanese War, the UN resolution number 1701, Hezbollah was supposed to move back to the Litani River.
Right.
It's signed to do it. It was supposed to do it. The UNIFIL, the army force of the UN, was supposed to uphold to see that that's what's going to happen. But we know what happened in the end. It didn't happen.
Right.
Hezbollah went back down to the border and built all of his army structures there with tunnels and everything. So to make a deal again? I mean, to wait until the next 7th of October to happen? At the end of the day, there's good and there's bad. There's right and there's wrong.
Got to get rid of the bad.
I think everybody understands that there's only one way. If there's a terrorist organization, the only way to deal with it is not to make a deal with it, it's to destroy it.
And while there's controversy surrounding Gaza and Hamas, of which there isn't for us, it's obvious there also the choice between good and evil. But up north, Israel's not occupying anyone's land. There's no refugee camps. There's no argument for, the background of why there's simply terrorists on a border who are looking to destroy and to kill Israel. And you think the international community would rally around Israel about that northern border, that this is our land and we rightfully have it, and it's not being challenged by others. We just deserve to have the safety, the peace, and security. And yet the international community does not get that. How involved are you when media come to Kiryat Shmona or to the area, try to understand what's happening? Are you persuasive? Are they able to become educated on it? Can we turn the world around to understand that these 80,000 residents deserve to go home, and that's a basic right of every citizen, that the country protect them?
Like you said, you would think that everybody will understand. It seems like a lot of people in the world don't understand the simple thing. I even want to say, it's not like you said, we're not occupying anything. In 2000, we withdrew from the Lebanon.
Right.
So the army went out of there. And in the year 2000,
right,
we gave them back everything they wanted. But at the end of the day, like I said, we're not fighting a state, we're fighting a terrorist organization. And I think that's what, when like you said, media come to cover the whole war in Kiryat Shmona, we try to emphasize the part that we're not fighting a state, we're fighting a terrorist organization. Right. At the end of the day, no country in the world would allow a monster like that grow and
right on the border,
and establish, straight on the border. It's not possible. It's not possible. That's what we show, and we try to persuade them. I hope that we do a good job. But at the end of the day, if no one's going to be there to help us, then we can just get to do the job ourselves.
Wow. And you're saying that not just as a resident of Kiryat Shmona, but you're saying that as somebody who's put his life on the line to fight, to be part of the IDF. And sounds like you're willing to do that again because this fight is worth it. It's important to offer that security up there.
We have no other option.
We have no other
And we'll do
option.
it again and again and again until we'll get our quiet and peace.
Wow. Akiva, I know this is not close to Kiryat Shmona. You schlepped in to be here. Thank you. Thank you for getting the message out. I hope those who are listening and watching all appreciate, understand a little bit more what you're giving up and your Mesiras Nefesh to be there at this time, and all those who've been evacuated who are not living in their homes, what they're giving up just to make sure that we have a presence there. And Hashem should keep you and all of us safe. And please, God, have safety on the northern border, hopefully without a war. And God forbid, if with it, it should be one in which we achieve our goals quickly and swiftly without any losses on our side. Hashem should protect and keep us all safe. And thank you for your leadership in the Kiryat Shmona community. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Thank you.
And we'll hope for better days to come.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you.